Teaneck has recently been named the model town by the United States Armed Forces. This predominantly white suburb of New York City is about to go under some serious changes. Already, the population of Teaneck grew by 300% between 1920 to 1930. Up until this point, Teaneck had had a substantial Jewish population in addition to pockets of other minority groups. Now more and more black families are starting to move into the neighborhood.
1949 was considered the U.S. model town, but it was probably a town with people who were pretty much the same religiously and ethnically and all, and so that, and I'm sure it was ideal and model, but it was not representative of what this country really looked like. So you began in 49, you began to get an influx of the Jewish community coming in that helped to enrich the culture, and then the late 50s with African Americans coming in. And I think that just made for a richer kind of town.
It seems to be a trend as that group of African Americans and Latinos moved up financially. They began to branch off to the suburbs, and the closest suburb seems to be, they could have been Fort Lee, could have been Englewood, but somehow Teaneck gets chosen as this, and it's almost like those chain immigrants that you hear of. So when one family moves to Teaneck, then everyone else follows. So a certain time period in the early 1940s, you do have a flock of upper to middle class African Americans moving to Teaneck. Now, there's complications with that as well, because initially they're only shown homes on one side of town. And so that's how you get the rise of what we call the black side of town. And even historically, I also went to Teaneck High School. I graduated in 1996. So when I was a student here, that door on Elizabeth Avenue was called the Black Door, and that has to do with the real estate practices.
When we moved to Teaneck, this area, which is known as the northeast section of Teaneck, was the only area in town that we were shown houses available. Not knowing the town, of course, and seeing this area was quite inviting, and so we decided to buy in the area. There were a couple of people on the street, Stuyvesant Road, African Americans when we moved. Most of the residents were white. We soon realized, however, that after being here for a while, that our white neighbors began to leave. Many of them that were here at the time were not seemingly as welcoming as there might be. There were signs all over this area, such as "Have you looked elsewhere?" "Try another neighborhood," those kinds of things. So we knew that there was something going on, quite different from the signs that we'd been accustomed to in Alabama that said very clearly who was allowed to live where. Either the sign said "no colored allowed" or "white only." The signs here were more subtle.
At the time, how did different segments of the population feel about the influx of African Americans moving into Teaneck? There was a split, right?
There's a split. On the one hand, you have the typical white flight. You do have that group but then also in Teaneck, historically, there is that population of liberals who are welcoming, who will even, when there's difficulty finding homes on the other side of town, who will purchase homes in someone else's name. So you have a white family who will purchase the home and then sell the home to a black family. So you have allies. It was a liberal, you already have a Jewish population here, and so historically those two populations are going to work together and they're going to be welcome.
As a result, we became involved in fair housing, and we would spend our Saturdays and Sundays being testers by going and testing out other areas in the town and in the county to see if discrimination was actually as we thought it could be. And so we would go, of course, and try to rent an apartment, and often been told that it was already sold or that they were no longer interested in renting it. And our white counterparts would come behind us and would be able to rent the apartment. So in many ways we were very much involved in helping to open up housing. Well, one of the things that we began to realize that as white flight continued, the local neighborhood school was beginning to become increasingly more African American. Because we were very much aware of what had happened in many places concerning schools that become predominantly or increasingly African Americans, we were quite concerned. And so we joined several other families and we questioned, what could be done, because no other school, elementary school in the town, had African Americans because of the housing pattern. And my husband and I would visit our neighbors and share with them our concern. We were not so much concerned about the academics changing drastically immediately, but unless the teachers began to move as well. But we knew that that was the kind of pattern that sets in, and we wanted to prevent that if we could. Not that we thought that one could not learn in a segregated school. My husband and I both had attended segregated schools. Well, I was able to get a master's degree, and my husband had a PhD degree, so we knew that learning could take place, and you could, even though we both had to move from the South to do our higher education learning. But we didn't want to see our neighborhood schools change or become less than it was. And so we were able to convince the Board of Education to try some means to change their pattern. And they came up with what is called the open enrollment. And that meant that students from all over the town could enroll in a different school, so that African American students could enroll in schools in other parts of the city. It passed. And so, but what happened is that only about 13 African American students transferred or bused to other schools in the town, but only one white family came into the Bryant School, so that we knew that that could not work. And so we began to continue to speak out at the board meetings and to challenge the board trustees to come up with something that was feasible. So eventually they came up with a centralized sixth grade school, which was our neighborhood school, which meant that all of the sixth graders, no matter where they lived in town, would have to come to this section to go to school. And I can tell you, one of the greatest experiences that I've had, both as a parent and a teacher, was the Central Sixth Grade School. And if you get a chance to read anything about it, it was so innovative, and they had, I guess, premier teachers who were there and dedicated, and students got a chance to experience different kinds of learning. That system lasted for a few years, but by this time, housing had opened up, and people, African Americans, were able to buy all over the town. And so that there was no longer a need to artificially try to integrate the schools. The whole focus, I hope that you understand about this, that the integrating of the schools was, academics was extremely important, but more important, especially for us, for my family, was for our children to get to know other children who were of different backgrounds. And you can't just, the best way to do that, of course, is being in school, having some opportunity to interact. And as a teacher here for over 40 years, I've had students to come back from colleges all over the country, and they will say, you know, I had the craziest roommate who said this or thought that, or I met people who had the strangest ideas because they had not lived among people who were different from them. And so that was the rewarding thing, that students got to really firsthand know people, and really it kind of destroys prejudices or that originate out of ignorance, you know, rather than, it doesn't mean that everybody has to love everybody, but it certainly means that one does not draw conclusions based on the lack of knowledge or experience. So Teaneck was really rich in that. The fact that they did this without court mandate or without any overt public display in terms of rioting or that sort of thing is what makes Teaneck stand out, I think.
There was no reason for that cop to shoot him in his back. There was no reason.
More trouble broke out the next evening during a vigil for Pinnell. Dozens of teenagers went on a rampage, and suddenly, this community's self-image was shattered.
We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
The relief of Teaneck police officer Gary Spath and the anguish of the Pinnell family in the courtroom became the emotions of a man acquitted and the protests of those still angered by the verdict.
Last April 10th, behind this school in Teaneck, New Jersey, a white police officer shot and killed a black 16-year-old. In the news reports, the demonstrations, the meetings that followed, that incident was often perceived as another bias-related act of violence. Yet Teaneck, New Jersey is not Bensonhurst or Howard Beach. In fact, in 1949, the U.S. government named Teaneck a model American town. It was overwhelmingly white Christian then. In 1964, after many blacks and Jews moved in, Teaneck became the first American town to voluntarily integrate its schools. Welcome to the 11th hour. I'm Robert Lipsyte. This is the first of a special two-program report on Teaneck. Tonight, we'll visit the town and listen to some of its varied voices to try to begin to understand why this story is not exactly black and white.
I was in 8th grade when Philip Pinnell was killed, and I do remember students walking out. Students walked out at the middle school level, students walked out in the high school level. Again, a multi-racial group of children walked out, but most prominently it was African American students that were affected. And it did kind of, you know, reveal some of the tension that was there in the building. A lot of the tension that even the teachers who spoke to me later, they didn't realize was there until that happened. And then students were just lashing out. I find that many children now don't know the story. There's something in Teaneck, and maybe that's just in the nation, like sometimes you don't want to remember, or you want to keep your dirty parts secret. So every year when I bring up Philip Pinnell, I'm always shocked at how many students don't know anything about it.
That it's a time, of course, that was very difficult. Philip Pinnell was one of my students. He was was, I taught science, and he was one of the classes that they infused that he was in. He had been in, I think, in the special needs program, but students were able to take different classes. Extremely quiet young man. Spath, the detective, was a classmate of my son, Clinton, so I knew them both. Such a tragic and unfortunate circumstance. I think that, again, it goes back to stereotype and fear, anxiety, that created the situation. That, as my son likes to say, that Spath was one of the nicest people, kids that he knew. Was nothing about him that would indicate that this kind of thing would occur in his life. I think that's what happened with Spath, was more fear and something than it was deep-seated racism. It's hard for me to think that that's what motivated or created. I think it was anxiety and fear and those kinds of things that just made it. That really caused quite a chasm in this town, and really created a different kind of atmosphere. People began to take sides, and we're better now, but I'm not sure that the total healing has ever taken place.
What was done afterwards to attempt to heal? And
They were, this town has, even going back to the integrating of the schools, didn't just happen. There were sensitivity trainings, meetings both with community leaders and the members in the community and the teachers and the clergy and the, you name it. So there was constant meetings and planning sessions, and many of which happened in this very room. And it was ongoing. So after the Pennell shooting, some of that resumed, and effort was made to help to try to bring the people, to bring about understanding and to calm the people, because it was ugly. Yeah. But it takes a lot. I think the key really in all of this is communication, and that if we could just communicate, much of the destructive kind of behavior can be stopped.
So, with that said, what problems still need to be addressed now, and how can you move forward with it?
Even though the white population among the students has decreased immeasurably, I believe that up through 4th grade, the diversity is still quite apparent. As you get into the middle school and high school, it begins to cease. And while you can't really do a lot about keeping people, in the town, it's important that those of us who are still in the town should work just as hard to maintain the kind of standards that we want the educational system to maintain. I believe that we have quite a well-organized recreational department in the town, a center here, but not as many activities for teenagers and above. It kind of drops off. There's lots of sports activities for the young and that sort of thing, but it kind of drops off. There's a need, I think, for a public swimming pool, for example. There is a small pool in the park, but I mean, really no Olympic size, the older kids can be involved in. And then again, getting back to what we talked about earlier, some provision should be made to allow for affordable housing for our young college graduates, to come back and to be able to, young professionals to come back and to live in the town.
How can the effects of Teaneck's history be seen today and the legacy of those people?
Can you rephrase that?
You can see, how can we see the legacy of integration in
Oh.
well, again, you do have a diverse student body that does have interaction. Maybe not the interaction that people may think that we have, but there is still interaction. You do
It's
have...
not like we don't talk to each other.
Yeah,
We're not like, get out of here.
Yeah, there's definitely, and I think students do feel that legacy, that, they shouldn't be closed-minded. There's this, like you feel like you know better, or that I should make an effort to, and I think that's the legacy of the history. Now again, does everyone feel that way? Not so much, but I think for a contingent, there is that group that says we still must work to build the bridges, and they feel that way because of the history of the town. There still is that contingent that wants to excel, and excel in the name of racial harmony. You still have those students in Teaneck, and I think that is a part of, their parents and their grandparents and how they were, again, just raised in Teaneck to have that type of mentality. Would you trade Teaneck for somewhere else?
No. I moved sophomore year to Georgia, and I was like, there's no place like Teaneck. The way they work over there, it's like, whoa. Like, I'd rather be here than anywhere else. Like, Teaneck, it just feels at home. Even though we have issues, we still come together when stuff hits the fan.
And it's a beautiful thing when they come together. Again, when they walk out together, when they're at pep rallies together, when you see the possibilities. So as Nia said, flaws and all, I've taught in New York City, I've traveled around the country, around the world. There's not many places like Teaneck. Again, just the fact that we're here and there's that possibility of unity, and there's sometimes the manifestation of unity. Again, flaws and all, I'd rather be here than anywhere else, except maybe France.
Hello. All right. 3, 4. I got something, y'all, in my bones. Make me wanna shout hallelujah, and I wanna sing on. Oh, sing on. Oh, yeah, yeah. Lift every voice and sing till it in heaven ring with the harmony. Oh, liberty. Let our rejoice and rise high. Loud as the roaring sea.
I'm a long way from Montgomery, Alabama, where I knew and experienced discrimination at its height, but to have the opportunity to work and to know Dr. King, and I wouldn't change any of it. I think it's all has been enriching.
What would you say you learned from him, and you learned from that experience that you brought here?
Oh, he truly taught me the understanding of nonviolence. Though Dr. King taught me that. I had never thought of myself as being violent and didn't grow up with that kind of thing, but there were times when it was very difficult not to be seething with anger. But he not only spoke eloquently about what nonviolence meant, he lived it. I happened to have been with him the night that his house was bombed, and before he knew whether his wife and his older daughter Yolanda were harmed, he was frightened, I'm sure, but he assured us that no matter what had happened at his home that night, that the Montgomery bus boycott would continue, and that it would continue non-violently. Well, as I say, I thought I knew what nonviolence meant, but when faced with your own personal trauma and not knowing what had happened to his family, he could maintain that sense that even in this crisis, violence is not to retaliate is not the way. He taught me that, and I've lived by that.
Were you directly involved with the Montgomery bus?
Yes, very much. It was quite an experience. Even though it lasted for just a little over a year, it was constant every night. I was quite young at the time, and I used to type the letters and news releases, and would sometimes travel behind Dr. King to make sure he had reached his destination safely, because he was harassed and arrested, and to let his wife know that he was safe and someone would follow him back, that sort of thing. I was very close to him because my father was president of the Board of Trustees and was in many ways responsible for Dr. King Board of Trustees at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, and he was responsible for him coming to Montgomery, so I knew him as family friend as well as minister.
How old were you at the time?
1920.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Anything else?
So.
I could ask you questions all day.
Yeah. I hope this helps.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.